Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for August 25th, 2015. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today we're joined by, well, I'm going to you first, Jim. Welcome in person, true life form. You look much better here than you do
I
on
really
the
exist,
camera.
yes. Yeah, it's nice to join you on the couch again.
Great, and you're here for some training this week, is
Yep.
that the plan?
Yep.
All right, very good. Glad to have you here. John Hogobom, welcome, John.
Thank you.
And Matt Kaiser.
How's it going, Brian?
Welcome, Matt. I'm doing well, thank you. And I'm Brian Rexroad, and first on the list here, we're going to go to Matt and kind of a new feature from the OpenDNS folks.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. So around the time of Black Hat, OpenDNS, which as most people know is a OpenDNS service, pretty much you just connect and use their DNS servers. They also do a lot of interesting security work. They released, I hesitate to call them tools because they're Twitter accounts. But there are two Twitter accounts, BGPmon and DNSmon. And what they're doing with these is they're making available to the community information about interesting anomalies in DNS and BGP. So this is kind of a cool look at their perspective on the internet, which most people don't have unless you're somebody who is providing services on the scale that OpenDNS does. You would know that these sort of changes are going on. So DNSmon, it shows you when a domain switches name servers. And this is relatively infrequent for a domain to switch name servers. To switch IPs is not that big of a deal in most cases, but to switch name servers means it's been either re-registered or moved, or it may suggest the domain's been hijacked. And that's the security value behind it. So it does require a little bit more look, a little more investigation into it. It's not a security alert system so much as it is an anomaly alert system to say maybe you want to look into this.
Right.
In much the same way, BGPmon tells you.
Before we go on, I just wanted to. So one of the, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier. In the normal process of doing a DNS resolution, if you're looking up a domain name, you're going to go to a DNS resolver, and we'll have no idea who actually resolved it in the end. The DNS resolver tells you the answer. But this is a case where they're providing DNS resolution, and so they're doing the resolving process and would have insight into who the authoritative server is that gave them the answer.
Exactly. So they can track that over time and see when the things change.
Right.
So that's their unique positioning that makes this kind of cool. And for BGPmon, they're doing a similar situation with BGP, which is a routing protocol. They're detecting a couple different types of anomalies there. If an ASN is advertising a route that they've never advertised before, or that could be considered in some cases hijacking of that route. Or if all of a sudden you've got some sort of service disruption and a number of prefixes just drop off the map, that's also something worth knowing about. So it's a cool way to get a view into, again, operations of the internet at large that most people don't have a view into.
Right.
And at least not at that scale.
Not at that scale, that's correct.
Not at that scale, yeah.
Folks, OpenDNS and Google and some of those that provide the big name servers are the ones that have the the visibility into the wide variety of stuff. Enterprises aren't going to have as big a view. Small companies, home users aren't going to have anywhere near that kind of view. So yeah.
Well, even large ISPs have a challenge with the view, and I think and what we should really do is get Rick Huber on the program. Perhaps we can do that. I'm looking at Dan, our director here. He's going to do this for us. He's going to help us. But we're going to bring Rick Huber on because I think he really did a good job describing what the nuances are around BGP and hijacking events. A case where somebody advertises an address block and usually it's a mistake, but sometimes there looks like there might be something nefarious behind it. But the opportunity to see that as an ISP is even very difficult. And there have been a lot of efforts around trying to incorporate security into BGP, but there are a lot of subtleties that make it a little bit of a tricky issue. That is, you have to basically get everybody on board in order for it to really be effective. And I think I think there was a reference around maybe 5% adoption on the internet so far. It's a really big challenge. So really interesting stuff from an analytical point of view. That is, if you can get a wide enough view of the BGP routing information, you can start to pick up on things like this. And I think one of the real things that's cool about making this sort of public domain available is that it really is, in my opinion, and we've done some analysis on that, it really is an art to determine what is significant and what is not significant. on the based on that data, because you know, one of the challenges, for example, a lot of large businesses will subscribe to multiple ISPs, and they may advertise their address blocks on one ISP until something goes awry, and then they advertise it on 3 other ones, the backup ones or something like that, and that looks like a BGP hijack from a, you know, a outsider's point of view, but from their point of view, it's all resiliency. It's the exact opposite. So.
Yeah, right. Even if you've been monitoring it for months or years, that change looks suspicious.
I was kind of curious, are they providing the information any other way than just Twitter?
I believe that BGP Stream is the website associated with BGP Mon, so you can go and take a look at that as well. So it's not just little snippets of text. They might have a little more trending around it. I haven't spent too much time with it.
I was wondering if they had like an RSS feed or something you could get that might be a little more digestible.
RSS feed. Oh yes.
Yeah, that's what
this was 1990. Yes. No, I'm kidding. I totally use RSS feeds myself, but I think Twitter sort of supplanted that in terms of your small bites of information on a scheduled scale, or whatever you want to call
Small nuggets, right?
Yeah.
Unscheduled and small nuggets. So, John, let's go to you. Last week we talked about the CredCrack activity, and I think we were waffling just a little bit about countermeasures, and I'm hoping you have a little bit of an update for us.
So actually the author of CredCrack on his blog posted an update, and he actually has a lot of interesting, or I shouldn't say interesting, very good, valid kind of best practices around how you might want to be able to mitigate or at least detect that the presence of CredCrack or Mimikatz or these kind of tools are in play inside your network. I don't know if we'll go over all of them here. The article's pretty good because it's actually pretty concise. He gives a nice concise readout though, but having good password and account security, so enforce least user access, so don't give people more privileges things than they absolutely need.
I think we had discussed that,
yeah,
or at
we
least
discussed
in the context
that
around
before. The other one, this one I thought was interesting. He says remove rogue administrative accounts daily. If you have rogue administrative accounts occurring daily on your network, then that's a problem. But really, I think the point is you should have some kind of script or processing running to look for any creation of new administrative accounts that you're not expecting. So hopefully you never see that happen.
So maybe he meant review to look for rogue administrative accounts daily and remove any that occur.
Right. Yeah, that's I think what he intended. And then securing administrative accounts. Basically don't use domain administrator accounts to log on to workstations, because that's actually one of the threat surfaces there with Mimikatz, is that it can extract those domain administrator credentials from memory if somebody happens to log into a workstation like that. Segment your workstations. Don't allow workstations to talk to other workstations over NetBIOS and SMB, unless you really need to. Most people don't have a need. You're usually doing workstations to servers and things like that. So he has some advice about limiting and restricting that activity. Also, do some network anomaly detection to look for, using your IDS to detect anomalies such as lots of SMB login attempts across the network from a single endpoint or whatever, so look for that kind of scanning activity, brute forcing. Another one that I thought was interesting is disable Windows Digest security provider in the registry. I hadn't really looked at this, but there's an article that he links to in here where you can disable that in the registry such that it kind of prevents Mimikatz from being able to extract these things from memory. I didn't get the whole details of actually how that works, but it's an interesting read, so I would have people check that out. And then
before you go, are you familiar with this one, Jim?
Not.
This isn't related to the caching.
No.
No. Okay.
I don't think it is. I think it's something about the LSAS service and Windows Digest and preventing people from actually being able to hook into LSAS or something like that. I'm not positive though. And then for environments where you are running Windows 8 or higher, Windows 10, and Server 2012, he mentions consider using the protected users group feature on Server 2012. That has some ways to help kind of prevent this type of activity. And also research and consider protecting the LSAS process, which I guess in Windows 8.1 and higher, there's some ways to help. They have some features in there that allow you to prevent who can interact with the LSAS process, which is where all that stuff is stored in terms of the hashes and whatnot. So
All right.
Interesting article. It's nice, good, concise kind of guidelines for anybody who's trying to protect their own network on how to protect and also do a little bit of detection in case it might be happening on your network.
Yeah, all very good advice. And it goes well beyond what we were able to address last time we talked about this. So it's good that you brought this update here. And we could have used this for sort of the top 5 list today. But we're going to have another one a little bit later here. So let's jump over to you, Matt, and talk a little bit about smart stuff.
Smart stuff that I wouldn't say is too smartly designed from a security perspective.
And we were debating
why.
How continue.
I think I did the short version of what you're going to say. But DefCon this year had an IoT, Internet of Things village, which is where they sort of, it's a little cluster of area you can learn a little bit more about a specific topic in security. And IoT was the big thing for this year. There's a company, Pentest Partners, and what they did is they took a crack at this Samsung smart fridge. And the model number it's actually this huge long model number, but basically it's a smart fridge that has a little touch screen on it that connects to the internet over Wi-Fi and has all these features like connecting to your Google Calendar. So instead of having a paper calendar on your fridge, you have your Google Calendar. It can show photos, it can play music, it can control the temperature inside of the fridge. All sorts of features, and I was going to say helpful features, but some of them are kind of like, my fridge did this before.
I have little doubt
that
if this were in my home, there would be a paper calendar hanging over top of the touchscreen. You wouldn't even know it was a smart fridge.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they've taken so many things. Like, now I've got more room for magnets. Great, I guess.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not.
Right? Well, if you put magnets on top of a touchscreen, that might not be a good thing.
I don't think you're supposed to put them on the screen. I don't think that was in the manual, though. I was reading the manual. But anyway, they took a crack at it, at least within the time span of DefCon, and they found out that this has kind of a common flaw that we find in IoT devices, where it does try and connect over SSL to certain websites, including Google Calendar, except it doesn't validate the SSL cert it gets, and that's pretty much the point of SSL, is to know who you're talking to. If you're not validating that certificate, you know you're encrypted, but you don't know who you're actually talking to.
Right.
So it seems that you can, if you've entered your Gmail credentials into your fridge and someone man in the middle of the connection, your credentials are out in the open. Now, it seems there's a couple other services that it also supports, and there are other models of Samsung fridge that support even more services than that. It looked from their analysis that the only thing that they're actually validating that SSL cert on is the update process, which is good, but it's not the complete, you shouldn't be doing it that way.
And if you weren't monitoring DNS mon to know that domain name was being hijacked, you'd have no idea, right?
Or if you were hanging out with a couple of our friends and it's like, oh, that's weird, my fridge is acting up again. I wonder why that is. Because someone on your land is monitoring. I'm just hypothetically.
It could happen.
Yeah.
But somebody hypothetically is throwing a Wi-Fi pineapple in your house.
Well, sure. I mean, your fridge doesn't know what it's talking to. I mean, it's sort of the same old story that we've always seen with IoT, where there's going to be flaws like this. I find it kind of personally interesting because a while back there was a bit of hype about, botnets running on your smart fridge, and every time we get a little bit closer to that story.
Existential example, right?
Yeah, it's like, botnets on your fridge. Well, it hasn't happened yet as far as we know, but these are steps in that direction. Yeah. I have complete faith that at some point we're going to see it happen. I just like to keep an eye on, what's going on in that space.
What I see, there's a little bit of a subtlety in this that perhaps, needs a little bit of attention. When I tend to think of IoT, I tend to think of something very simple and somewhat focused in terms of its function.
Okay.
Where it's sort of a controller CPU type thing. But this particular example sounds more like a small laptop embedded in the door
it's
of
like
a
you taped an iPad on your
an iPad or an Android or something.
Yeah.
And so it really grazed the space between a thing and a computer, right?
Yeah, it's true. I think I agree with you. The embedded space is really where IoT, I think. But it's more than that, because it's not just like you've taped the iPad on, it's like you've taped the iPad on and routed it into the temperature controls for the fridge and all the actual physical effects that you can do from that device.
This is true. And I think what I would tend to do from a security standpoint is look at it from the point of view of how you manage it. That is, does it automatically do updates? Or are there things that you have to do to manage it, administer it like it's a computer? Or is it kind of a hands-off and kind of manages itself.
Do we need a DMZ from our fridge now? All of our untrusted IoT devices go in here, the things that are...
Let's keep your lanes segmented off.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is it, like you said, is it something that you have to manually get on there, or is it like your phone where you're alerted that the update is there, but you have to tell it to install it?
It's that level of automation that I think is an important, and I don't think the industry as a whole is there yet, but it's that sort of thing that really I think is an important part.
Is it ultimately, a full-blown, Linux underneath there or something?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, what is the operating system underneath there? Because with all these apps that it's got, it looks like an Android to me.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
Well, at some point, somebody is going to need to make APIs so that all of my devices, I can have a control panel and control my refrigerator and my thermostat and my lights and my everything.
They're working on it.
Right? Because you got all these different providers, so there's going to have to be some standards, I think, at some point about how to integrate all of these devices together.
That's where I attack.
In your smart home.
Well, you'll be glad to know you can actually connect your phone to this. Not only can you control your fridge, you can have it find your phone when you lose it.
Right.
So you can poke your
Which I
fridge and
said,
it'll call your phone.
If you need your refrigerator, if that's your only friend to call you when you lose your phone, then you need some help.
Fridge, I need to get pizza, help.
All right, I think we're digressing here, so we're going to move on to something more productive. And Jim, you have an update for the Windows 10 patches.
Yeah, this was an article in the ExtremeTech blog this week. And I don't know if this is, the way they were talking about it, this looks like it's a step backwards from Microsoft. With the previous patches up through 8.1 and Windows Server 2012 R2, when they release a patch, the description is, in the patch notes, is at least somewhat descriptive of what it is that they're updating. With the 3 updates that they've provided to Windows 10 since its release, basically the patch note said this improves functionality. Included in there, though, were security patches. Included in there was a kernel patch. If they continue along this line, it makes it much more difficult to debug, figure out which patch broke things so you can back that particular one out. I'm hoping that they're not actually going to continue with the sparse description, because it would be, I would think it would be difficult when you start introducing Windows 10 into the enterprise if you don't have a better understanding of what the updates do. So I'm hopeful that if they're hoping to get penetration into the enterprise, which that's what they want. They want everybody to dump their Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1 and go to 10. I'm hoping that they are going to reverse this trend of the last month or so, where they're not really describing the patches real well.
Well, I'm going to play glass half full for a moment here.
Okay.
You can't blame them for, first of all, trying it out to see what happens, and hopefully they get appropriate feedback associated with it. I don't think there's any question about what your opinion on it
Yeah, well, it is. I've made my opinion pretty clear, I think, from the way I've described it.
I'd venture to say that most of the consumers really are not too concerned about that, but your point about enterprise penetration is significant.
And I think at this point, Windows 10 probably hasn't made too much of an inroad into enterprises yet. The Windows 10 that's out there is all consumer. They're the guinea pigs at this point. So I'm hoping that we can have some influence on Microsoft before it starts rolling out into the enterprise.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't even go into some of the other issues that people have had with the potential privacy issues in Windows 10, which some people are suggesting holding off on it. I haven't moved to Windows 10, although I know a few people who have tried it out. I may spin it up on a VM here just to play with it a little bit. Have you?
Yeah, it's okay. It's stealing all my. infiltrating my privacy, but I'm not really concerned.
Yeah, well,
I'm just kidding.
I don't want it sharing my Wi-Fi passwords. So.
Right. I guess the other perspective of this would be that if they aren't telling you what the updates are, then it's that much more practice as a forensics analyst, right?
Yeah, I guess it'll keep me job security for me.
And I don't know that, in my opinion, if their intention here is that this might help prevent hackers from reverse engineering the patch in order to determine how to exploit, that's not going to help.
It's not gonna help.
That's not going to help that.
It's not going to help that at all. So
I don't know what
I
the
doubt that
intent
was
here
the
is.
significance here. It may have been.
Do we know the intent behind the decision?
I have not heard Microsoft address why they made the change, but there, in the article, they have links to the most recent Windows 7 or the Windows 8.1 update, or maybe it was Windows 7 Service Pack, and the Windows 10 updates, and the Windows 10 one basically says what I said. This is a functionality, improves functionality or something like that. It says nothing really about what it's doing. So yeah, it's.
But the other one has the details.
But it doesn't. The other one doesn't have a lot of details. So you have to go into the individual,
patches.
KBB, but it does. Or the KB. Knowledge base reports, but it does go into a little more. This is a security fix, and it addresses this issue. It goes into more detail than the Windows 10 ones have so far. But we've only had a month of the Windows 10 updates, so.
Right. Okay. Well,
they could still change.
Hopefully they'll come back.
Yeah.
All right. Next segment here, we're going to talk about the top 5. Perhaps 6 threats to data centers and how to counter those. And this actually I picked up off of ITWire.com. It's a blog from Greg Barnes. And first on the list is, well, I think we probably all would have guessed this one, is like, what are the threats to data centers? Denial of service attacks. So, obviously you need to be paying attention to that. I actually had an opportunity to talk with, had a visit with the FBI folks, and they were saying that there is, in fact, a growth in extortion attacks against organizations that is attempting to attack a website or something along those lines and demanding an extortion fee for it. And if they don't pay, they raise the bar for the denial of service attack, presumably. I'm not sure how serious this is. We don't really have any statistics on it, but certainly one that to be paying attention to. And certainly, exploiting the websites for attack as well. That is not necessarily flooding it, but potentially attacking the applications themselves. So
Turning them into bots is another.
Well,
right?
that's certainly
not only they can be a victim of DDoS, but they can be a participant in DDoS attacks because they got huge amounts of bandwidth.
Yeah.
A lot of times in these data centers.
We've seen those attacks. They're big,
absolutely.
actually.
So you not only have to be concerned about being a victim of a denial of service attack, but potentially being a contributor to a denial of service attack, which could impact the operation of the data center, but on top of that could elicit some complaints.
Yeah.
For web application attacks, I always like to make this point is that a lot of people think they don't have anything to worry about because they're not somebody's target. But we've seen tools that do nothing but scan the internet all day, find vulns, and automatically do it.
Yep.
You don't have to be somebody's enemy to be a victim of this kind of attack.
This is true. Absolutely. So first one is the denial of service attack. Second one, web application attacks.
I was a little bit ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great. You're jumping in. You're leading ahead here, and this is actually another aspect that is, as you pointed out, there are attackers that are they're not looking for a particular thing other than exploitable websites, and then to find out what they can get out of it. So having those systems locked down. By the way, for the denial of service attacks, it's absolutely necessary to not just have your systems patched, but to have some type of a service, an external provider that can absorb that attack traffic if it's the case. So we're not just talking about problems here. We're talking about solutions, right?
And even with your web application attacks, make sure your software behind your website stays updated, because that's what we see, right? You get these various content management systems like WordPress or whatever. You don't keep them up to date. somebody's going to find it and they're going to dump like a web shell on there,
Right.
or turn it into part of their infrastructure for their malware enterprise, like as part of a drive-by exploit or to exfiltrate data to, things like that. So you don't want to have your
The
device
back-end
become part of it.
application, as well as the coding of the web application itself, needs to
Right.
be paid attention to very carefully.
Right, there was another WordPress update up to 4.3 this past week. So.
Right, and we've talked before, depending on the hosting, I mean, if you are a owner of a website or something and it's hosted by somebody else, you need to make sure you understand where that interface is, what they're updating versus what you're responsible for updating.
And even the ones that automatically update it, sometimes they're a little slow. Because I've been talking about this for the last few WordPress updates, but I've got a couple of sites hosted at providers that supposedly automatically apply the updates, and I noticed that one of them was sending me email until yesterday, so about a week, saying that the latest version was 4.2.4 when I had updated it by hand to 4.3.
So there you go.
So, yeah.
All right. Number 3, the DNS infrastructure. It's often forgotten, but until it gets attacked, and you realize that nothing works without it. So, the DNS infrastructure can be a subject of attack as well, and it can get used as a part of reflective attack activity if you haven't controlled who has access to the DNS infrastructure, and what types of queries it can be performed on it as well. It needs to be included as a part of the denial of service attack protection. 4th item here is SSL-induced security blind spots. This is your opportunity here, Jim. Bring it up.
Yeah, well, there are two sides to SSL.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to secure their connections when they're passing,
Right.
sensitive data back and forth. But for us as defenders, if you've got an IDS, you can't look inside the encrypted connection.
Right.
So it does introduce blind spots. There are potentially some ways around that. We were talking about that before the show. That there are ways of essentially becoming a man in the middle and sending certificates to the client that are signed by somebody they trust. But then if the good guys can do it, the bad guys can probably do it too. So.
And we've even seen some tool sets, I can't remember the name of it now, but recently we talked about some of these tool sets that people have put on endpoint devices that intercept the SSL.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember the name of it.
Like Lenovo's Superfish.
Yeah, Superfish. That's what I'm
Superfish,
thinking of,
Yeah.
So they were kind of doing that man-in-the-middle interception of SSL.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, this is a data center perspective,
know.
so that's where you're hosting the SSL. And if you have a web application firewall, it can help you with both web-based attacks. It gives some context in the activity of the sessions, and it can terminate the SSL as a part of the data center activity to help facilitate any analysis and logging that's necessary to be able to do it. But there are some tricks in doing that.
Well, and once you've turned on SSL, you've increased the computational costs there, and that requires resources. So then the bad guys, if they're doing their denial of service attacks, can just be getting you to set up and tear down more SSL connections, use up more resources on your servers that way.
Absolutely. So for anybody that's hosting an application, presumably you're controlling access to the application, and so one thing that, in fact, we talk about it all the time in the context of IoT, brute force and weak authentication attacks. So what are the countermeasures there?
I mean, for most situations, if you can rate limit the number of attempts that are made and make sure that your password policies are up to snuff, or don't even use passwords. If you're using SSH, use a certificate instead. I mean, that makes it so much harder for the attacker to get in, and it's relatively simple to set up if you know what machines you're going to be connecting from.
Right.
I really think rate limiting is the big one here for most services, though. If you can slap that on, bolt it on, it doesn't have to change the application necessarily, but it allows you to make sure that all the legitimate requests are coming in. They only need to usually attempt once, maybe twice if somebody fat fingers a password, or if you do it automatically, once is enough. 50 is forget it.
Yeah, so one of the problems that you run into is that they might, an attacker might bring a botnet to do a lot of brute force password guessing. They may have lots of IP addresses that are coming in. So as you point out, rate limiting or perhaps CAPTCHA to be able to filter out the bots and confirm the humans. And in certain circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that all the time, but it can help to alleviate when it appears that there's a risk scenario or suspect IP addresses that are trying to get in.
If you really paranoid, use IP tables and filter access for those administrative services to only IP addresses that are administrators, or address blocks that
Yep.
should be allowed to do that.
And then you get fail to ban on top
Fail
of
to
that,
ban.
which you
Layers
use.
of security.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Number 6 here, it's sort of my ad. It wasn't part of the blog, but we think it's an important one, is destructive malware. That is, somebody might want to try to get access to a system. We already talked about web application attacks where they might want to steal data, but if they get access to the system, they could potentially take it down. Are you prepared for that? So how would you counter that?
How would I destructive malware? I'd say backups is your first and best bet.
Right.
I mean, you do what you can against malware. If somebody gets on the system and their intent is to destroy or hold your data at ransom, there's not too much you can do once they've pulled that trigger. Having offsite backups, multiple, if you can afford to do that, is the right way to go.
Yep.
But just having backups isn't enough. You actually have to verify that you can get your stuff back off your backups. It's true. Because there's nothing worse than you get into this situation, you get all your sensitive files overwritten by the ransomware. You say, okay, I've got backups. You go back to your backups, and your backups are corrupted.
All right.
If you're big enough site, have DR, have a good disaster recovery site or location. That's what I would say. I mean, in all the places I've ever worked, we have DR sites. And you make sure that you don't have SSH pass-through between your primary and your secondary site, because if they compromise the first, you don't want them to laterally just be able to go to the secondary and take it down.
That's right. So you need to be able to isolate the disaster recovery sites from each other, which is a little different than your typical disaster recovery scenario. If you're looking at just like a physical issue or a power outage or something like that,
You want
that's
the stuff
different
to have
than
been mirrored over there, relatively recently, so you're not losing stuff. But
Absolutely. So you have at the top 6 for this week in terms of protecting data centers, protecting against denial of service attacks, web application attacks. Make sure the DNS infrastructure is covered. Prepare for SSL, that is being able to do analysis in that environment and still be able to protect the systems. Brute force and weak password authentication protection, and things like CAPTCHA and to be able to throttle that activity. And last but not least, destructive malware. So I guess this is kind of akin to hosting websites as well, particularly ones that are monetized through advertising.
It's a little weird pivot on that maybe, or a little crossover. But I guess first I want to describe, because maybe, I know we've talked about malvertising in the past, but maybe people don't remember. But malvertising is if you ever go onto those websites, like a news website or lots of different websites, and they have those ads that get inserted. Typically those ads are really pulled from a third-party advertising network. It's not as though whatever website you're visiting is even really aware what site is being displayed to you as the user when you visit it. They just have kind of a pass-through third-party advertising network that's displaying that to you. So malvertising is where bad guys can inject their advertisements into this collection of advertisements that this third-party advertising network is providing, such that every once in a while, when somebody goes to visit that page, they might get served up a malicious ad that might redirect to someplace and give us some drive-by exploit kit, like nuclear exploit kit, or the Angler one is another big one right now. In any event, so Amazon actually came out with an article recently that they are discontinuing Flash ads as of September 1st from its e-commerce websites.
Now you're referring to Flash format here.
Yes, the Adobe Flash, right? Not Flash the superhero. If that's what you meant.
Not the ones that flash in your eyes.
Right, so the Adobe Flash format, which a lot of the advertisements are because it provides animation and all kinds of nice effects and whatnot. This is kind of on the heels of the fact that there have been 34 Adobe Flash bugs that were fixed just this month, 36 bugs fixed last month. So there have been a lot of bugs, the least of which have been two really important ones that were kind of discovered as part of the hacking team exploits that were released. And when that actually happened, Mozilla, from the Firefox team, they actually they pushed a patch to prevent anybody from doing any Flash inside their browsers because they were concerned about it for a period of time until the patches were available. Chrome and Firefox and Safari, they've all limited the use of Flash recently, just because it's been so problematic. Not to knock on Adobe too much, but apparently everybody's kind of waking up to the fact that there has been, and this is not a new problem. This has been going on for years,
going on for a long time.
But lately it's been even worse, especially with the nuclear exploit kit. I think that's the one, and the Angler exploit kit, which have integrated a lot of these Flash exploits into them. So anyway, just interesting. Amazon, they're trying to make sure their customers don't get impacted. So on the advertising networks that they include in, they're not allowing Flash ads anymore. And that's the going forward plan.
Okay.
The next story that's related to this, there was a malvertising campaign. Another article came out yesterday or the day before about one of the largest Australian telcos, Telstra. Okay. They had a news blog website of their own that imported these third-party advertising network, and it was injecting malicious ads that was redirecting to a Google shortener that actually led you to a nuclear exploit kit drive-by that was dropping the Tinba Trojan. I actually don't remember. I was going to look up what the Tinba Trojan does.
Tiny Banker is the other name for it.
Oh, okay. Well, then it's probably a crimeware type of thing, right? Yeah. Okay. So just another example, something that maybe viewers should be aware of. If you are a company and you have a website and you are importing advertisements from these third-party ad networks, I know a lot of people do that. Something to be aware of, that this is a possible avenue that people could be visiting your website and getting infected, and it's not really your fault. It's not Telstra's fault either here in that case. It's the fact that these malicious ads were allowed to be seeped into these third-party advertising networks, and then people just, they just import them into as part of their web page.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think part of this has to do with perhaps the vetting process. That is that a lot of these advertising networks are actually sold through third-party brokers.
Probably.
That need to be, and I personally am not well acquainted with that environment, but there may be a vetting process that's needed to make sure that they're working with reputable advertisers as a part of their activity.
Right.
There may even be a layer deeper than that. That's part of what makes this so challenging, is that there are so many layers. Product A is being advertised on the site. You're not buying an advertisement from product A or selling it per se. You're actually working through a third-party broker that manages the aggregation of appropriate ones and determining which advertisements are going to be most appropriate for particular clients.
Right.
And so it's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. It's almost magical sometimes, right? You go to visit a web page and you'll see an advertisement. You're like, how the heck does the Yahoo News site know that I'm, I like Team Fortress or something, like a video game or something? Like, how the heck would they know that? Anyway.
I find that they usually stick on one thing. If I visit maybe one person's site, and if I clear my cookies between each session, and it'll be like, all I'm getting is like one service's ads on every single site I'm going to, and it's always the same ad. It's like, okay, I get it. I know you want me to buy this, but you don't have to show it to me everywhere I go.
Right.
Okay, let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here. And this first one, we were all scratching our heads on this a little bit. This is port 91 TCP. It's actually registered to MIT Dover spooler, which I'm pretty darn sure is associated with some sort of a print spooler, but it's not one that we're personally familiar with. And we're not sure why somebody would be scanning for this. It might actually be some other reason. It might not be related to this MIT Dover spooler, but nevertheless, we're looking at 90 days of activity here. And the probes happen to be from a security firm. So I'm going to vote on the side that it's innocuous activity, it's a reputable organization, but we're not really sure what the motivation is. There was, John, you were speculating that maybe it's a
I speculate it
sort
was
of
just
alternative web
some alternative
port
web.
or some type of a proxy
I'd also
port or something like
speculate that whoever this security firm is that's scanning for this port, they probably know something.
They probably know what
they
they're
probably
looking
know
for,
that there's
right?
some kind of
Yeah.
vulnerability that we don't know about yet.
Yeah,
That
we didn't really have the
Whatever
opportunity
that
to check with them
particular-
on it. Yeah.
Whatever that particular web service is that.
But nevertheless,
shows
that
up.
probing activity is out there. So if you're using port 91, perhaps you have insight into why they might be doing that probing. You might want to make sure. And you know, like I said, you know, there could be a vulnerability associated with that they're looking for to see what the level of exposure is. Next item is scam probes on port 5093 TCP. Now this is actually associated with an application you wouldn't be surprised about scanning activity. This is a Sentinel license manager. So this is effectively a licensing tool that's supposed to help manage licensing of copyrighted software, and so it can be packaged as a part of this. This particular probing activity is mostly from a source in the Netherlands, and you can see it's sort of spiky in nature. Now this isn't terribly new activity. There's other probing that's been going on in the past, but it kind of showed up in the radar in terms of the amount of activity that we're seeing over the last 90 days here. And so again, it's something that you want to be paying attention to. I suspect that if somebody were probing for this, they would be trying to find systems that perhaps are not well protected and may be able to resell licenses that they've stolen from somebody. So I'm speculating on that aspect of this, but nevertheless, that probing is out there. Next item here is scam probes on ICMP. That's type 3, code 2. This is a destination unreachable code, and basically, generally all these ICMP 3 and sometimes the ICMP type 11 codes are indicators of some sort of a backscatter from some sort of activity related to I don't want you talking here, or you can't get there from here type messages. Surges, tend to be associated with denial of service attacks. Sometimes, the scanning activity can do this type of thing as well. In this particular case, the activity appears to be the surge of activity appears to be addresses. An example was associated with a mitigation provider, a DDoS mitigation provider, sort of a confirmation that was associated with denial of service attack, and another case where it was an address in Turkey that was an apparent target of a denial of service attack. Next item here, we talked about this last week. I wanted to just give a bit of an update. No revelations associated with it, but this is a reflective denial of service attack activity using port 111 UDP. This is Port Mapper. We're looking at 60 days of activity, so you can see where the activity kind of wound up here. We saw targets in Brazil. Actually, more recently, some of the targets have been US-based consumers associated with that activity. The good news here is it's not a significantly increasing trend. There isn't a lot of increase associated with it, indicating that this might not become a real significant problem, but it still is representing some attack activity, and it is persisting. And on a related note, this happens to be related to reflective denial of service attack activity on port 1900 UDP. And we're looking at the combination of both source and destination activity, because the destination activity would be requests on SSDP. The source activity would be the responses associated with that. The good news here is we're actually seeing a decreasing trend associated with this. Some blocking activity has been put in place and a number of ISPs are doing this to help curtail this. This is a LAN protocol. You really shouldn't see it on the internet anyway. In fact, it's a defect on the devices that are exposing this to the internet. So a number of organizations are sort of banding together and trying to block a lot of this activity, and it seems to be having a positive effect, and that is a reduction in the amount of attack activity we're seeing on the internet as a whole. There are still some other problem areas that I think are going to get addressed relatively soon. Looking at the top 10 most probed ports, no real big movements here. Port 443 is down the list, relatively speaking. That's not terribly surprising. It does move around a little bit. No ports have really moved up a significant amount. We still have port 23 on the top, 22 following that. 1900 UDP, it looks like there's more probing activity trying to find SSDP servers, and perhaps not finding so many of those because of the blocking activity. And then we have port 80 TCP, looking for that gray web space, and 445 TCP. I'm always looking at Matt for this one because I want to get my definition straight. And then the port 21 320, we're going to take a little closer look at that. That happens to be associated with a proxy application. I don't think it's actually registered as a proxy application, but everybody that talks about it that I've been able to find talks about malware acting as a proxy on their
Right,
machine.
it's like malware activates a proxy on infected devices on that
Right.
port. Yeah.
Followed by 1433, that's Microsoft SQL database, looking for those weak database access points, and then 3389, remote desktop protocol, which actually had been sort of off the radar for a while and kind of back on the radar. So looking at port 21230 TCP, this is that what I'm calling malware proxy. We're looking at 180 days of activity. There's been consistently inconsistent scanning activity on this port, but it's increasing, and I think that's the significance here. Most of the probes are from a US-based hosting provider and relatively aggressive. So there aren't a lot of addresses doing this, but the ones that are have been getting more aggressively. And it appears as if it might be a sort of a small group of compromised servers in that hosting provider. So perhaps some sort of a systemic issue that the attackers have picked up on and are able to gather additional IP addresses in that segment of address space.
Are those like weekly cycles where it looks like a whole set of new hosts is added every week with a little bit of variance inside of it?
It's not a lot of new hosts or hosts going away. It has a lot to do, I mean, just one or two hosts can make the difference here.
Okay.
Yeah. They are servers, they have some bandwidth to play with.
That's some big pipes.
Right. In terms of the most sources doing the probing, very little movement here in terms of the ranking. Port 23 is still at the top of the list, so we're going to take a look at that, followed by 445 TCP, and then 22 TCP shows up on the list. A couple of others that are, well, absolutely less interesting. Looking at port 23 TCP, that's Telnet. You know, we looked at this last week, and where we saw this was actually in this declining stage. I speculated that it might come back, and surprisingly enough, or perhaps not so surprisingly, it is kind of on the rise again. We're looking at the number of sources that are doing this probing activity. So this is as machines sort of get dropped out of botnets, for example, that are doing recruiting activities, the botnet operator will try to recruit new ones into it, and that's the effect that we're seeing here. And that's our show for today. I'd like to thank you for joining us. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at AT&T ThreatTraq at list.att.com, and you can find AT&T ThreatTraq on the AT&T Tech channel. It's techchannel.att.com. It's available on YouTube and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at ATT Security. There are too many T's in this. It's very confusing. And but more importantly, first of all, Jim, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your shirt here.
Well, since I did my little TCP dump tool thing talk the other week, figured I'd bring in my T-shirt. PCAP started to.
There you go. So if you're an analyst, that's a motto that you can adopt. If it's PCAPs or it never happened, how can you tell if it did, right?
Exactly.
And so make sure you have that analytical capability in place. So thank you, Jim, for joining us today. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Thanks, John. Yep. Thank you, Matt.
Anytime.
I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and until then, keep your network safe.